Welcome to the IWRA UNESCO online conference, Emerging Pollutants, Protecting Water Quality for the Health of People and the Environment. Thank you for joining us to hear some world-class presentations on a topic of critical importance over the next 3 days. My name is Renée Martin-Nagle, and it will be my pleasure to serve as the moderator of this opening ceremony. As a reminder, all of our speakers, please be aware that this session is being recorded. I have a few housekeeping reminders for everyone. We invite the attendees to submit your questions in English via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We will address as many of your questions as possible in the Q&A session at the end of the opening ceremony. You will only see each question once it is answered, either verbally or in writing, when they will be displayed for everyone to see. As we have a huge audience, we don't have time to answer all the questions we will receive over the next 90 minutes, and we will try to collect the written responses to place on the conference website following this event. Please note that the chat box is disabled during this session. However, we ask that you keep an eye out for any useful messages that may be shared in this box from the organizers and the moderators. You also have the option of switching on the automatic subtitles at the bottom of your screen if you have difficulty hearing. If you experience any technical problems, please Google Zoom Help Center or send an email to online.conference@iwra.org for assistance. And now, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Abou Amani, who is Director of the Division of Water Sciences and Secretary of the Intergovernmental Hydrological Program. Abou?
Yeah, thank you, Renée. Distinguished expert, eminent scientist, Professor Yuanyuan Li, President of the International Water Association, Dr. Kuhlman-Klensch, Executive Director of the International Water Association, a representative of the United Nations in international organizations and other partners of UNESCO, participants from around the world, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening from wherever you are connected. I'm delighted to welcome you on behalf of UNESCO to this online conference on emerging pollutant, protecting the health of people and ecosystems, organized jointly by UNESCO and IWRA. Water is a critical determinant to achieve internationally agreed goals and targets, including those contained in Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, and the Sendai Framework on Disaster Risk Reduction. The recently adopted 2022 Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework also recognizes the central role of water. Clean water is vital for healthy people and ecosystems. It supports all forms of life on the planet Earth. Yet, the availability and quality of world-limited water resources are diminishing due to negative impacts of human activities and global demographic changes. World freshwater resources are under growing pressures to sustain 8 billion of people, a milestone of the population reached out of, as you all know, a month ago. Let us remind ourselves of the fact that, unfortunately, over 2 billion people still lack access to safe clean water. Climate change adds uncertainties in the availability of already limited resources. Freshwater resources are becoming scarce and less reliable. Increasing climate variability and changes and frequent, coupled with unsustainable growth and consumption, is leading to more severe and frequent water-related disasters and risks, worsening environmental degradation and profoundly affecting economies, societies, and the environment. An increase in global warming is projected to exacerbate risks to ecosystems and humans. And as you know, 9 out of 10 disasters triggered by natural hazard during the last decade were water-related. Ladies and gentlemen, another level of uncertainty arises from water quality degradation. New and emerging pollutants are found in water resources worldwide, posing threats to human and ecosystems. The scientific understanding on emerging pollutant is still very limited. More research and international scientific cooperation are essential to fill these knowledge gaps. The Intergovernmental Hydrological Program of UNESCO on IHP is therefore putting particular focus on the promotion of research, knowledge generation, and capacity building on emerging pollutants. Within its strategic plan on science for a water secure world in the changing environment for the next 8 years, we are putting an emphasis on emerging pollutant, and there is a dedicated output on strengthening the knowledge base on emerging pollutants and microplastics. This conference, organized in the framework of the implementation of IHP output related to emerging pollutant and microplastic, is very timely, as we are all preparing for the upcoming UN 2023 Water Conference, as you know, which will be held next March, which will be a very important milestone to generate commitments and mobilize actions by all actors towards the achievement of SDGs and the UN International Decade for Action on Water for Sustainable Development. Scientists play a key role in knowledge generation and the development of new and innovative approaches to address water problems. Not only are knowledge generation and more research needed for evidence-based decision, but sharing and disseminating research funding and the knowledge is critical, especially for developing countries where scientific and technical capacity are very limited. Open science is essential in contributing, sharing the knowledge. As you know, UNESCO member states adopted a recommendation on open science, which affirm the importance of open science as a vital tool to improve the quality and accessibility of both scientific outputs and scientific process to bridge the science, technology, and innovation gaps between and within countries and to fulfill the human right access to science. Ladies and gentlemen, UNESCO has been mobilizing scientific community and partners for a science-based global water assessment as a contribution to the UN 2020 Water Conference. Scientific-based global water assessment in line with open science and citizen science would contribute to ensure availability and accessibility of up-to-date knowledge addressing the intersectorial, systemic, integrative, and transdisciplinary nature of the complex and interconnected water challenges. Knowledge and innovation dissemination is essential for improving water management in regions, particularly where water problems are severe with devastating effect on the health, well-being, and livelihood of people and on valuable ecosystems. As a platform for sharing the scientific knowledge and research funding, this conference comprises 2 high-level panels, 10 thematic sessions in the 5 themes, with a total of 70 oral presentations and over 85 first stage presentation with more than 1,000 participants. I believe this is an opportunity we have to contribute to the discussions in promoting evidence-based decision making on water resources by disseminating the knowledge on emerging pollutant. I want to take the opportunity by ending to thank the International Water Resources Association and highlight our long-standing fruitful cooperation. IWRA is an active contributor to IHP through its worldwide network of experts, water professionals, and government organizations. UNESCO is delighted to join forces with IWRA in organizing this very, very important conference. Finally, I would like to thank and appreciate all the team who have worked tirelessly from outside. As you know, my colleague Sarantuyaa was leading a team who worked tirelessly, as I said, in putting all this together. So I'm looking forward to exciting discussions, and I wish you a successful conference. Thank you very much. Back to you, Renée.
Thank you so much, Abou, for your gracious comments. And now we are going to hear from Yuanyuan Li, who is president of IWRA and also vice president of the General Institute of Water Resources and Hydropower Planning and Design in the Ministry of Water Resources of China. Yuanyuan?
Yeah, thank you, Renée. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies, gentlemen, and friends. Dear Abou, it's my great pleasure to welcome you attend our third online conference with UNESCO on emerging pollutants, protecting water quality for the health, people, and environment. As you know, water quality is one of the main challenges that worldwide are facing to the 21st century, not only threatening human health, but also reducing ecosystem functions, as well as limited food production. Water quality degradation translates directly into the availability of the water scale of the water resources and into environmental issues, social and economic problems. The 23rd Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals of UN bring water quality issues to the forefront of the international action by setting Goal 6, especially aiming to ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all, to respond to the pressure challenges posed by water quality issues. Other SDG includes health, ecosystems, and poverty reduction also address the water quality issues, therefore demonstrating a growing attention on the urgent needs to improve water quality worldwide. Furthermore, newly emerging pollutants like personal care products and pharmaceutical materials, pesticide and industry and household chemicals are used and released continuously into the environment, even in a very low quantity, and some may cause chronic toxicity. Some will still and no long-term impacts on human health and ecosystems. As we are familiar with COVID-19, it's certainly a danger remaining as the impacts of the water pollution, particularly the emerging water pollutants, which jeopardize the sustainability of water resources at the alarming rate. We should aim to invest in water and protect our water quality and jointly build a greater resilience to climate change, health, and food system shocks, and more effective management of water-related disaster, and risks. Therefore, we together with UNESCO and Sabu have mentioned to decide to choose this theme that can reflect the rising concern about water quality worldwide and contribute to protect the water quality for human well-being and ecosystem integrated quantity and quality management of water resources towards the water security to ensure the water securities. We also hope to from this online conference to make some contribution to the UN Water Conference that will be happened in the March of this year. Our friends Abu have been mentioned before. Last but not least, I also would like to express my sincere thanks to Professor Gabriel Eckstein. He's also the past president from IWRA and currently is a professor from Texas A&M University, and Mrs. Sarantuyaa Zandaryaa from UNESCO as our International Scientific Committee co-chairs for this online conference, as well as our IWRA EU teams, as well as the technical supporting teams from the UNESCO. I wish a great success to the third online conference, and I hope you all enjoy the participation and learn from this interesting, important, and interactive online conference. Please also stay tuned for IWRA more activities and events. We're looking forward for you engage and support. Thank you for your attention. Back to Renee.
Thank you so much, Professor Li. And now we're going to hear from the two co-chairs of the International Scientific Committee for this conference, Sarantuyaa, Zandaryaa, and Gabriel Eckstein. Sarantuyaa is the program specialist in the Division of Water Sciences of the Intergovernmental Hydrological Program at UNESCO. And Gabriel is IWRA past president, as Professor Li just said, and he is also professor of law at Texas A&M University and director of the law school's program in natural resources systems. Over to you.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Abu, and thank you, Dr. Yuanyuan. Good morning, good afternoon, dear participants from around the world. On behalf of the International Scientific Committee of the conference, which brings together eminent scientists from around the world, all the regions of the world, Gabriel and we are honored to introduce the conference's thematic focus and its objectives. Next slide, please. It has been highlighted in previous speeches, the quality and clean water of world's water resources are essential to sustain human well-being and healthy ecosystems. However, the quality of world's water resources is declining in an unprecedented rate. Water pollution is one of the biggest threats to human health and well-being, and it's also one of the 5 major drivers of the ecosystem degradation and biodiversity loss. Water pollution also undermines food security and agricultural productivity. So world's water resources are not only polluted by known pollutants, but are also polluted by unknown pollutants, which are called emerging pollutants. So these new pollutants represent a new global water quality challenge because of their widespread occurrences in water resources, both surface and groundwater around the world. The biggest challenge posed by emerging pollutants is that the scientific understanding and knowledge about emerging pollutants is limited, also about their presence in the aquatic ecosystems, fate in water resources, as well as about their potential human health and ecological effects. Emerging pollutants are not monitored, neither regulated. They are not reflected in water policies. So that's why UNESCO, together with the International Water Resources Association, are co-organizing this conference dedicated to the theme on emerging pollutants, with the aim to bridge the science policy interface in order to disseminate knowledge, generate knowledge and research findings on particular issues addressing emerging pollutants, promote science-based policies, and mobilize action in order to manage emerging pollutants to reduce their human health and ecological effects. So the conference focuses on this theme with an interdisciplinary multisectoral perspective, including 5 sub-themes. So first, we really need to understand the potential human health and ecosystem effects of emerging pollutants. Next slide, please. And that's why one of the themes focus on emerging pollutants in aquatic ecosystems. There are some evidences that emerging pollutants have negative effects on aquatic organisms, but it is not fully understood. And we also don't have sufficient scientific knowledge to develop policies to mitigate these negative risks to ecosystems. Groundwater is one of the major water supply sources for cities, agriculture around the world, and emerging pollutants are also found in groundwater resources. So we really need to focus on how to prevent the emission of emerging pollutants into groundwater resources. Wastewater is one of the main transport mechanisms through which emerging pollutants enter into water resources. So it is really important to manage wastewater in a way that emerging pollutants are not introduced into water resources and aquatic ecosystems. The conference also promotes a circular economy approach in order to prevent the emission of emerging pollutants into the environment and aquatic ecosystems. So the theme 4, sub-theme 4, also focuses on the life cycle management on emerging pollutants. Well, of course, emerging pollutants comprise a wide range of pollutants, including microplastics, nanomaterials, pharmaceuticals, PFAS, etc. So it is really important to prioritize certain emerging pollutants in order to develop appropriate policies. So UNESCO, through the Intergovernmental Hydrological Program, has been promoting research, knowledge generation, knowledge dissemination, to fill the knowledge gap on emerging pollutants. And our work has really impact on science-based policy development, and based on our previous assessments, some regions have also developed policies to address and monitor certain types of emerging pollutants. So UNESCO's collaboration with the International Water Resources Association on this major conference also provides an important platform to bridge science, policy, and practice interfaces, because the International Water Resources Association is one of the global professional platforms that brings together scientists, engineers, educators, and water professionals. So with this, we really hope that this conference will be a milestone to disseminate knowledge and promote science-based policies on addressing emerging pollutants. With this, I would like to hand over to our co-chair, Professor Gabriel Eckstein from IWRA. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarantuyaa. And what I'd like to do is to build on what Sarantuyaa just presented to you in terms of the importance of this topic on emerging pollutants and the purpose for us holding and organizing together this conference. This event brings together experts and researchers, as Sarantuyaa explained, from a broad interdisciplinary perspective, who are going to present their work, who are going to share their research with all of you, and who are hopefully going to engage with everyone on this critical global issue. We want to explore the science, the policy, the law, the economics, and all the other aspects of emerging pollutants, because this is not just a science issue. We want to take it to the policy outcomes. We want to have science-based conference, this science-based conference with this, with policy solutions resulting from this event. And so we are trying to bridge the scientific world and the policy world, but also something Sarantuyaa said, we want the practice world, the folks who are actually implementing all of these ideas, whether at the research level or at the practice implementation solutions level. We need to bridge these groups together. And that's the purpose, one of the main purposes of this conference, to try to bring everybody together to talk about these issues and to help each other. We want the policy people to help tell the scientific community, the research community, what are their priorities. We want the research community to say to the science, to the policy and to the practice community, these are some of the concerns and the challenges that we are facing, we're seeing out in the world, and you need to address this from a policy perspective. So this is a very interdisciplinary approach that we are looking at, and wanting to come out with potential ideas and maybe even solutions so we can deal with these problems of emerging pollutants around the world. So now, going to the conference objectives, we want to explore the relations between water and emerging pollutants. How does the freshwater environment and maybe the marine environment interact with all these pollutants that Sarantuyaa mentioned that we are producing in our developing economies? We want to know the causes for these pollutants. We want to know the effects and the consequences, what impacts they may have on people, on the environment, and so on. And we want to know how this all fits in with the broader topic of water quality and water security, climate change, demographic changes, and so on that are happening around the world. In addition, we wanted to examine possible water policies and technologies that could lead to changes in how things are done. Clearly, what's happening around the world is concerning. We have these emerging pollutants, and the policies and the regulations have not caught up to all of these problems that are emerging, and we need to do something about this. And again, this is one of the objectives of this conference, to try to identify these potential policies and technologies. We want to identify various policy and institutional changes that are needed to ensure water quality for people and communities and for the environment. We also want to showcase successful examples of innovative natural and technological solutions to these problems of emerging pollutants and water quality challenges. And of course, we want to look at the sort of the life cycle, the circular economy options and approaches for addressing all of these challenges posed by emerging pollutants. And we want to work with all of the stakeholders, all the participants, all the government officials, representatives, decision makers, the public, and of course, the private sector. We have to work together to find effective and feasible solutions by looking at this full life cycle approach. So going to the conference outcomes, what we hope to achieve here is we want to create opportunities for all of you, all the participants, all the speakers to share and disseminate new information and knowledge about emerging pollutants. We want to instigate and motivate further research and engagement beyond what we are doing here today. We want this to be a springboard for further knowledge development into the future. We want to provide all stakeholders, practitioners and decision makers with options and ideas for policy and practical solutions that are grounded in sound science that they can then take and try to come up with mechanisms that will deal with these problems that we are encountering throughout our globe. And in terms of outcomes, I want to highlight two things that are, sort of practical outcomes that we hope to have coming out of here. The first is policy briefs. Following this conference, based on the thematic structure of this conference, we will be issuing policy briefs that will, through IWRA and jointly with UNESCO, addressing the various problems that being discussed here at this conference. And secondly, we're going to have a book project that is built on the presentations and papers that are being presented here. And I'd like to ask Sarantuyaa to please come back and maybe give us more information about this book project that you're actually leading here.
Thank you, Gabriel. So the two major outcomes, as Gabriel mentioned, will be policy briefs addressing 5 themes of the conference, targeting policymakers, decision makers, and water professionals, in which the scientific information gathered and generated by this conference will be conveyed to the policy makers. And the second, more scientific output will be this UNESCO Springer Nature book on emerging pollutants protecting the health of people and ecosystems, which will be a collection of high quality selected contributions to this conference. So with this, we really would like that the knowledge generated, disseminated through this conference will be a reference scientific material for decision making, for practical solutions to address this problem, as well as to generate more research on this important topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarantuyaa. So if we go to the next slide, the conference, what we have in store for you, we have 2.5 days of presentations by experts, leading experts from around the world. We have nearly a dozen VIP and high-level speakers, including 2 high-level panels that are featuring some of the world's leading authorities on emerging pollutants who are coming from intergovernmental organizations, from the private sector, academia, and so on. And as you will see here on the slide, those 2 high-level panels will take place on Wednesday and Thursday at 13:45, 1:45 in the afternoon, CET time, Central European time. So you must make sure to adjust your for your time zones. In addition, we're going to have 10 panel sessions with around 70 speakers who have submitted their abstracts and will be presenting their research that they've done on emerging pollutants from an interdisciplinary field for various perspectives. We have nearly 100 poster sessions. I think we've already put the links in the chat for you to look at for those. And this is really an opportunity to learn from all of these experiences and all these experts. But what we want you to do is not just sit and watch and view the presentations here. We actually want you to engage, and we have partnered with the Global Water Partnership to create an online community of practice space where you can actually engage and network and discuss all these issues during the conference, but also after the conference concludes in the weeks and months afterwards. You will have the opportunity as a member of this online community, and we will be providing information on how to join that community with the Global Water Partnership. You will have to create an account on the partnership to be able to access it, but that'll give you the access to the other of hundreds and hundreds of people who are participating in the conference and who will be joining that platform to continue the discussion long after the conference is over. Before we wrap up, I just want to highlight one last item, and that is the IWRA World Water Congress, the 18th edition, which will be taking place in Beijing, China from September 11 to the 15th. The theme of that conference is Water for All, Harmony Between Human and Natures. And I'm highlighting this because in addition to having 6 dedicated sub-themes, there's going to be a sub-theme that is focusing on ecosystem health and functions, which is really focusing on water quality improvements. And we will be continuing the discussion that we are starting here on emerging pollutants. We will be taking it to that World Water Congress in Beijing. We are going to welcome all of you to engage in that discussion. Abstracts and special sessions. The deadline is the 28th of February, so there's still quite a lot of time for you to submit your proposals. And I think there's already the link in the chat on this. You can also find it on the IWRA website. Last thing, I want to first thank the International Scientific Committee for all of the dedication for their weeks and weeks and months of hard work behind the scenes, putting this all together, working with the speakers, working with the tech staff, working with people at UNESCO and IWRA to put this together, put the program together. I really want to thank the technology and communications and all the staff at UNESCO and IWRA for all of their efforts behind the scenes and for helping to guide this to what we have before you today. And I especially want to thank my partner in this project, Sarantuyaa Zandaryaa, for the wonderful collaboration we've had over the past months. And thank you all for joining us. We are looking forward to working with you, to collaborating, to speaking with you, to engaging with you. And with that, I will turn back to Renee.
Thank you, Sarantuyaa and Gabriel. And now we will hear from our keynote speaker, who is Claudia Olazabal, who is head of Unit of Sustainable Freshwater Management in the DG Environment at the European Commission. Claudia?
Good afternoon and good morning to everyone, ladies and gentlemen. I'm first very grateful to UNESCO and the IWRA for inviting me, and I feel very humbled to be talking about policy making among the top leaders in research on emerging pollutants across the world. And I am really extremely grateful that I'm given this possibility to give you really a very brief. I'm really going to be with a torch, showing you the main highlights of what we're doing in the European Union in terms of emerging pollutants. And I will also chain with several things that either Gabriel or other previous speakers have said in terms of the need to engage with everyone in a very multidisciplinary way. So next slide, please. So I think I'm in a convinced audience, so I don't think I will have to spend a lot of time convincing you of the urgency to act. Here you have numbers. This is not only for emerging pollutants, this is for all pollutants, and not only for water, but also coming from soil or coming from air. That's the diseases and the number of deaths that we can really trace to environmental pollution in the high-income European countries, so not even all European countries. But that also shows that even in countries with very, very developed healthcare systems, the number of deaths per year due to non-communicable environmental related diseases are very, very high. So if only for an issue of public health, we should definitely act and fast. But of course, as been already raised, it's also an issue for the environment and also other species which are living with us in the planet, but also, of course, in terms of water availability in a world that is with an increasing population, increasing water demand, and of course, where water scarcity can become a very serious and is already a very serious problem. Next one. But before I talk about the future and the present, if you allow me, I will want to take you back in the past. I would like to mention a report that was published in 2001. So that's a long time ago. That's 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, by the European Environment Agency, with some lessons learned about what happened in the 20th century. I think it's a very interesting reading that I would recommend to you. And here we see the really big culprits of the 20th century, things that went really wrong, and where either we put on the market or we put something else on the market that created them. So we have the radiation, we have the benzene, asbestos, PCBs, we have the halocarbon with a link to the ozone depleting problem. We have the DES in terms of prenatal exposure and cases afterwards, antimicrobials. We have the sulfur dioxide and the acid rain. We have the MTB that happened in this, of course, very much used in transport. We have the TBT that we used also in transport and created a lot of problems. We have the hormones, we have the mad cow disease. So this is only a limited collection of things that really went wrong in the 20th century on things that initially seem to be a very good idea and a clear example of innovation and progress. So what can we learn from all this? So the next slide, please. From all these case studies, which were done by many experts, not only European, also American experts, there's a number of lessons, in particularly 12, which I'm going to just quickly go through because they have inspired and continue hopefully to inspire what policymakers should be doing. So first thing is that we need to acknowledge that no matter some of these substances that went wrong had some kind of risk assessment done to them or some kind of assessment, but notwithstanding that we can do and we should do better and better risk assessment for any substance being put on the market or allowing in the environment, there is an issue of ignorance. And by ignorance, we understand that there are things which we will not know, things which we cannot predict. I mean, I think few people could predict from the halons before putting them on the market that they will deplete the ozone layer of the atmosphere. So there are things which we will not know, and there are bad surprises that happen down the way, and we need to cater for those, this kind of degree of uncertainty, risk, but also ignorance, and we need to communicate on this. Second thing is, because we don't know everything, and we will never know everything before allowing substances on the market, there needs to be a long-term monitoring, so that we need to see what happens in the environment to see whether something can or is already going wrong. We need to reduce the blind spots and gaps on scientific knowledge, and I think conferences like the ones of today, tomorrow, and the day after, where you'll be discussing this. This is an extremely crucial point, and this type of conference is very useful. But of course, this scientific knowledge, and it's all about bridging the gap between policy making and the research community, needs to be properly communicated. Identify and reduce interdisciplinary obstacles, and there indeed it's an issue where perhaps some water experts are involved, but not health experts, on the other way around, or there's air experts which are involved, but not the water experts that know what would be the consequences on aquatic environment. So this interdisciplinary cooperation has proven to be extremely important if we want to know what could be all the aspects that could go wrong. Of course, always, and that we've seen with the type approval of the cars in Europe, we need to make sure that the information on which the assessments are based are as close to real world conditions as possible, and that we are not allowing something on basis of conditions which are idealized and not necessarily what we're going to find. We need, of course, to look at a range of alternative options if something goes wrong. And then we also need to have, of course, and you are better placed than anybody else to know this, we need to have relevant specialist expertise involved in all the phases. We need to, of course, and that's easier said than done, regulatory independence of interested parties. That in a world where a lot of information is being traded and a lot of interest groups are being involved, the independence part is very important. And the last two ones, what we don't want to avoid is that paralysis by analysis, that by wanting to gather as much information as possible, we don't act, and that lack of action leads to enormous environmental consequences. Next one. So now I leap forward to the future and to the present rather, and I'll talk to you about the Green Deal. The Green Deal is a massive new agenda. It's, of course, the name seems to convey that it's an environmental agenda, and it's, of course, an environmental agenda. But certainly for the European Commission, the European Green Deal, it's a growth agenda. It is a growth. It is perceived as a growth agenda, but a different type of growth. Our current growth system would not lead us to where we need to be, and this is a different type of growth. And within this, the European Green Deal, which is one of the very, very, very first things that the European Commission adopted. I mean, the President von der Leyen, she took the job on 1st December, and on the 15th of December, she had already put the Green Deal on the table. So she really, that fast, she wanted to make it happen. covers many, many things. And one of the things that it covers is that we will not have the kind of growth we want with the level of pollution we are suffering. So it's the Zero Pollution Action Plan, among many other things that cover climate change, nature, energy, circular economy, etc. Next one. In this zero pollution, two things I want to highlight to you is the integrated aspect of it. So we need to look at all the components at the same time. We need to look at all the sectors, because at the end there's a very cumulative effect. So we need to have a very integrated manner of all the different paths and routes that chemicals make it into the environment, and who's producing them, and who is creating them, and where do they end up, and what are the exposure paths to humans and biodiversity. So one of the thing is the very integrated approach. And the second thing I want to highlight, so we have the vision by 2050 for the EU, where air, water and soil pollution is reduced to levels no longer considered harmful to health and natural ecosystems. So when we talk about zero pollution, I would not hide you that when we started talking, industry thought that this seemed to be a bit too ambitious, that we will never have a zero pollution in terms of complete absence of pollutants in the environment. And what you have here is not a complete absence, is a risk-based vision. We will not get rid of all the pollutants that are already there, but what we can do certainly is avoid that some more come, and that we remediate so that the levels do not pose harmful effects to human health and the environment. Next one. What's the hierarchy, our hierarchy of action? Of course, prevention. Prevention should be, we should not allow pollutants to go into the environment. So the first one is prevention. That's not new, and everyone follows that approach. Minimize and control. And then only at the end, for the problems that we couldn't really avoid, we have to eliminate or remediate. But what I want to also highlight to you is the circle. So that the pyramid in itself is not really very new. But what I want to highlight is the transparency, the accountability, building accountability on who are the polluters, the reliability of the system, so that the public, but also the private sector knows that the system is reliable, and the participation and transparency. We need to make it a societal discussion with all the stakeholders and civil society and the public, with a very transparent information given to them. Next one. And there we get into the chemical legislation. So I zoom from the zero pollution, which covers everything, now to go to the chemicals. The chemical legislation, it's important in this discussion because they are the guardians at the gate. The chemical legislation, it's what the system that we have in the EU, but any member state or any country, sorry, that has chemical legislation, is to make sure that we don't allow in the environment, we don't let in substances which we will laterally regret. So the guardians at the gate, we have a lot of EU chemical policy, but the heart of it, for many of you already know, is called REACH, which stands for Registration, Evaluation, Authorization, and Restriction of Chemicals. So the REACH is the heart of our guardians at the gate. There are many other pieces of legislation, but I would just highlight this one. And the more we see what emerging pollutants are happening and how some of them made it into the environment and we should have stopped them, the more the guardians at the gate become extremely important. Next one. So the guardians at the gate needs to be really the core of having a safe and sustainable chemical, so that chemicals are produced in a way that we maximize their benefits for society and for the environment, but avoiding the harm they do. So again, you will see the same pyramid that we've seen before. Let's try to prevent and only minimize and control and eliminate in limited cases. Next one. So again, we want to have innovation, and by innovation in the EU, of course, we understand making new products, which could be the solution for new materials or new situations. But at the same time, innovation, we understand it as looking for substitutes for substances which we thought are very good and solve a lot of problems, but are harmful to the environment. So the substitution principle, it's a very strong point there. Of course, strengthen legislation, but of course, strengthen knowledge and science, and strengthen global cooperation, because we cannot do this alone, and we should not do this alone. We should build this in a globalized world altogether. Next one. So there's an issue, as I was mentioning, to make sure that all the chemicals that make it so that we let go through the gate are safe and sustainable. We try to substitute and minimize where some of the users, we really need to accept some of the users, but then we need to put in place a systems where as soon as possible we'll have a substitute and really avoid the most harmful ones, because the benefits that they will bring to society are limited compared to the environmental damage. So there we have indeed the concepts of new hazard cases. We have the concept of one assessment, one substance, one assessment, to simplify things. And we have the One Health concept also. And then you have the need to look not only at substances, and then I'm sure that you're going to discuss this at length during these 3 days, not only at substances on their own, but at the effects of mixtures, which has also always been and still is a hard nut to crack, the effects of mixtures. Next one. And now I will focus more on water. So the chemical legislation is our guardians at the gate, but let's see that some have made it through the gate, and they are already in the environment. So we use for water very much the system of watch lists, which are substances for which we still don't know what their effects is, but we suspect they are pretty bad for a number of reasons, or because they are quite ubiquitous. They are all over the place already, that we say, let's put them in a watch list and monitor them and gather in parallel more research on their effects, so we can decide whether we should restrict them in the water. So we have already restricted and have threshold values and concentration values for a number of substances, the usual suspects. But for the new ones, which we don't know whether we should start regulating, we have this watch list, and we have a surface water watch list. We have created a groundwater watch list, which was voluntary, but we are trying to make it mandatory. We have recently created a watch list for drinking water with substances, which are basically endocrine disruptor, and we want to create a watch list for soil. This is our system for trying to, as fast as possible, as Gabriel was saying, trying to act before things really become unmanageable. Next one. And then I will very quickly, so that you see the latest we've done. So in October 2022, we have just a revise of our list of pollutants in surface water and groundwater in the EU. I will just briefly give you some brush up so that you see what are the kind of substances we're really looking at. So next one. Also, surface waters, we have included new ones for which we have also given a threshold. So there's a number of pharmaceuticals. I would highlight here ibuprofen, because it's becoming very ubiquitous, and the amount of you, because it's used very widely by European citizens. So we have included a number of pharmaceuticals. We have included the PFAS. We have included bisphenol A for the first time, and we have included new pesticides for which, and as a metal, we have included silver. So it means that on surface water, for these substances, we have thresholds, and if the thresholds are surpassed in surface water, the member states will need to act to reduce the concentrations. I would like to also highlight that on pharmaceuticals, in parallel, we are revising the whole EU pharmaceutical legislation, and there we are strengthening very much the environmental risk assessment that producers of pharmaceuticals need to do before they can apply for a permit for placing on the market. So we are acting on both ways, of course, here on the water, but we're acting at source, making sure that pharmaceuticals will be safer. Next, please. We are also deleting some, so there are a couple of one pesticide, a couple of pesticides, and some general use chemicals, which we have seen that the efforts that have been done over the years have led to decreasing substances, and we can indeed leave it to the member states to act on them, but they will not be anymore in the EU list. Next one. The surface water watch list. So in this watch list that I was just mentioning, there are two groups which we are really keeping our eyes on. One is antimicrobial resistant genes. Antimicrobial resistant genes is becoming really a problem, as you all know and better than me, and microplastics. And so what we're saying here is, as soon as we have reliable and common methods for all the member states to measure those, we should immediately put them in the watch list and with as a candidate for restricting them quite soon in the future. Next one. And for groundwater, so we have again increased the number, and we put some pharmaceuticals in groundwater, because we are seeing then the PFAS again. And there you need to know that several member states and also non-member states have filed for asking for a total ban of or wide ban of PFAS in the EU, and a number of pesticides that we've also included in terms of making mandatory A, monitoring, B, thresholds, and if thresholds are exceeded, action in the water. And that's my last comment. In parallel to this, we have just at the same time made a proposal to revise the Wastewater Treatment Plants Directive. The Wastewater Treatment Plants Directive is a massive piece of legislation in terms of the impact it has in Europe, and it has not been touched, it had not been reviewed since 1991. So that's a lot of years, and a lot of innovation and new emerging pollutants have come up since 1991. So we've just opened up and so make it a revision of this piece of legislation. And we have introduced many innovations and new adaptations to technical knowledge and scientific knowledge. And we have strengthened enormously compared to 91 the treatment of micropollutants. Since this is the kind of thing that we are seeing in urban waters that we are treating. So a big push on also in terms of treating those micropollutants in the new legislation in the EU for wastewater treatment, which had not been revised for 30 years. And I think this is, I know this has been very brush and very rapid, but so that you see that we are trying, and of course no system is perfect. What Gabriel was saying, to try to make policy making, which is very difficult, particularly for 27 countries, policy making as agile and dynamic as possible, to be able to respond quickly to what science are telling us. And particularly in emerging pollutants, where we didn't know what their effects will be, and now they are all over the place, and we need to act very quickly. So we're trying to make our systems as agile as possible to be able to react. Next one. So I would like to thank you very much. I've put here some links that will give you in detail everything that I've rushed up in my very quick presentation, and I will be, if there are questions and answers, very happy to reply to any question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudia, for this fascinating presentation. I learned a lot. I'm sure everyone else did too. And as we know, the European Union has been in the lead of environmental protection for a long time. And it's good to know how the European is leading protection against contaminants in water. And we have time now for questions and answers. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Monica Garcia Quesada, who is with IWRA as the Smart Water Cities Project Officer, and she's going to moderate the Q&A. Monica?
Thank you, Renée, and thank you to all our distinguished speakers for the interventions and for keeping to the time. This has given us some time for questions. We have had interest from the audience, but if members of the audience would like to propose their question and have some comments or questions to make, please use the Q&A section at the bottom, and we might be able to include it in this in the few minutes that come. If you allow me, before going to the questions from the audience, I would like to start by asking a question to our keynote speaker, and also to propose a question to the whole members of the panel. For Ms. Olazabal, thank you for your intervention. And I'd like to see that I see that the EU strategy has been able to overcome a silo approach to emerging pollutants. You've mentioned that as well as a water strategy, there is a soil strategy, a general chemical strategy, and even a whole economic approach to contaminants. Just an open question on the policy consequences. What can we learn from that? What takes to be able to overcome this silo approach? Also, for the members of the panel, I'd like to ask a question. We see that the emerging pollutants face at least two difficulties, which I'm sure a lot of the presentations in the conference will address. One is that the scientific evidence on how these contaminants affect human life and the environment is developing, and that comprehensive data is also scarce. And I'd like to ask you what the panelists think of the precautionary approach. How can that be strengthened to prevent new contaminants and new problems? And also, what can be done to raise the profile of these contaminants and their effects before it is too late or too complicated to act? I don't know what you would like to do, Renée. Perhaps we can go first to these questions and then to look at the questions that the audience have proposed.
Yes, I think that's a good idea. And also, I would love to hear a discussion among all of the panelists on some of these issues.
Exactly.
Claudia, as our keynote speaker, would you mind leading off with the responses to the questions that Monica posed?
So breaking silos, and I think other panelists, I'm sure they have a lot to say. It's easier said than done. Not only between scientific disciplines and scientific communities, but also in terms of even public administrations. So we have a difference of public administrations. The ones that deal with water are not the ones that deal with air, and not the ones that deal with soil, and not the ones that deal with marine. So there is a fragmentation in first in the administrative competences. Then indeed, each one of these problems needs different scientific communities to come in. So I think what is already a very good thing is that there is a realization that not one community and not one administration would have all the answers, because everything so is interlinked, so intimately connected in reality and in the environment, that not one will have the answer and not one will have the full vision of the whole. So just that there is a humble recognition that we will need to see it from all the different angles to be able to succeed. So that is already the realization, but it's not that easy. And even I think ministries in different member states or different countries are confronted to this administrative silo and academic silo. No? But it's I think just conferences like today that would indeed bring and pull together many different gray cells from different corners, not only of the economy but also of academia, is the kind of thing we need to make it almost a systematic approach, and that would help.
Right. If the members, any of the panelists would like to participate, please raise your hand and intervene. Yes, Sarantuyaa, please.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Renée. And thank you, Claudia, for this excellent presentation, which gave an overview of how emerging pollutants should be dealt with from the policy perspective with a holistic approach. With regard to your question, Monica, about the precautionary principle in the absence of solid scientific evidence, and I think that is a very large question itself. And emerging pollutants actually comprise two types of pollutants. One, they exist since long time, for example, pharmaceuticals, but their emissions into the environment now are of the concern because of the high quantities of pharmaceuticals entering into the environment. And we cannot eliminate pharmaceuticals because we need pharmaceuticals for human health and well-being. But the problem is with the aging population, with the growing population, more and more pharmaceuticals in terms of quantities and in terms of the diverse compounds are going to be found in the environment. So in this case, the precautionary principle is very difficult to implement, but what we really need to look at is the sustainable use, consumption, and production. So how to educate people to be more responsible in terms of using pharmaceuticals and disposing the pharmaceuticals that are left unused, or how to improve wastewater or solid waste management in order to minimize the input of these pollutants into the aquatic environment and finally ending up in water that we consume, or the presence of these pharmaceuticals in aquatic organisms. On the other hand, there are pollutants which are new, which have been resulting from the technological advancement or lifestyle that are found newly in our water bodies. And that is where we have little knowledge about their potential effects on ecosystems, on human health. That's actually the precautionary principle really has important role to play. And unless we have solid scientific evidence that these pollutants have little effect or no effect on human health or ecosystems, we don't have to promote their use and eventually their emissions into the environment. So the precautionary principle should be more on the upstream side, how to incorporate these new pollutants or these new products in our production and consumption patterns in different sectors. It doesn't only concern the water sector. Actually, the precautionary principle should be applied in other sectors than the water sector, for example, agriculture or industries. So that's where this problem of emerging pollutants requires a holistic approach, action, and engagement from all actors, from all sectors. Thank you. Over back to you, Monica.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is very related to one of the questions from the audience, from Denise Seaman, who said that this is a timely conference, and she asked if there could be a response on whether risk assessment and technology assessment has failed in the past. And they ask how can we improve this risk assessment and technology assessment. Perhaps Claudia, would you like to take that question?
I mean, we are, I think, constantly striving to improve risk assessments, either in terms of data availability, so that the data we feed into the risk assessment, but also the risks that we are envisaging, and also the compartments we are looking at. For instance, we've been fighting, I was until recently working on soil, increasing and enhancing the risk assessment on soil and soil biota, which is, nobody knows very much what soil biota, how it is. So there we need to increase enormously our knowledge about impacts on soil biota. So in that sense, we need to increase our knowledge in terms of risk, the data that we feed into the assessment, the exposure routes, and the targets that we are looking at, and so necessarily we are improving, and that we also look at this One Health, so that we are really looking at the health of everything, so not on the environment, the human, and but also be very aware, and that links to the precautionary principle, that even if we got fantastic risk assessments, and hopefully one day we will, there are things we will not know. There are things we will not know. And so what do we act with that level of uncertainty? And in the EU, the precautionary principle is one of our guiding principles. It's in the treaty. So this is as high as it gets in the EU. Yeah. So if it's in the treaty, so it's in the treaty, the precautionary principle, but we have applied it unevenly. In the 90s, we applied it a lot, perhaps less in the 2000s. So we've applied it unevenly, also in a bit in competition to wanting to innovate on new products. And wanting to, of course, put on the market new products that would be a solution for many things. No, so there I think all the examples of things that have gone wrong and that have costed to society an enormous amount of money, not only in terms of cost of remediation but death, etc. Would allow us, the more we know about those, would allow us to put in the balance competitiveness, innovation versus precautionary principle.
Yes, Gabriel, please.
So I think it's an interesting question, because when I look at risk assessment, I look at it as one of the mechanisms for implementing their precautionary approach, the precautionary principle. Precautionary principle is, to some extent, this amorphous idea that we should take a precautionary approach to all these new pollutants and so on. But it's always hard to understand, what does it mean, precaution? Well, how are you cautious in terms of how you address these kinds of pollutants and these new products, new technologies, new chemicals, and so on, before you know what the potential consequences may be, or maybe there won't be any. And so risk assessment is one of the ways that you implement this. But I think that we sometimes separate the notion of precautionary approach or precautionary principle and risk assessment to such an extent that they are treated separately, and they really need to be sort of much better integrated, and integrated at the level of what I would call responsible science. One of the things we have to remember is that science is not relegated only to the academics or to the research community. Industry and the private sector are part of that scientific community. And when we think about responsible science, we tend to think about it only in that academic realm, or only in that research realm, in the public sector research, and not in the private sector area. And I think this is a challenge for the private sector. They need to present themselves as part of that responsible scientific community and integrate into the whole risk assessment and precautionary approach process. There's always seems to be a tension between certainly the government and government science and private sector science in terms of the priorities and the perceived consequences or potential consequences. And I think there has to be a better link between these communities, because they're really the same community. They're just in different parts of our economy, parts of our society, but they really all need to be part of that responsible scientific community.
Yes, thank you so much, Gabriel. I wanted to propose a question now to Mr. Abou Amani. It's posed by a member of the participant in the audience, who shares a little bit a certain frustration of when we look at open science and the understanding that it can do a lot of things on solving and bringing innovative solutions, but the frustration comes from seeing that it is difficult still to apply this open science in certain parts of the world, that they refer particularly to Africa, and the fact that a lot of Africans are suffering still from the lack of clear water. Perhaps if Mr. Amani would like to answer that question.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Monica. Yes, indeed. I think we need to separate things. Of course, open science is considered as an accelerator for making the scientific knowledge produced accessible to all. But not only that, also being part of the process of generating the knowledge. If you look at the different principles related to the open science recommendation, you can find out the fact that the bringing on board local and indigenous knowledge is an element which has to be considered. And also all the issue related to infrastructure and helping to produce and improve the knowledge base has been considered. Now in Africa, there is already an open science platform, which is already available. Now, what I can say vis-a-vis the issue of water access, the issue of water access, we need more investment in Africa vis-a-vis that. Of course, the technology can come on top of this, but the main challenge is really the issue of investment, how to reach communities which are not connected to the network. I think that's one of the big challenge, and also how to take advantage of innovation. And in that regard, of course, we need to find a way how to accelerate the open science framework within Africa, and to make available existing innovation already, which can help to boost and accelerate the issue of water access in Africa. So definitely UNESCO has been working with African Union on that. As you know, African Union has a strategy on the issue of science, technology, and innovation. So we are working with African Union in order to make open science a reality, so that scientists and those who need the knowledge can have a platform where they can come together and contribute to solve societal issues, particularly the issue of access to water resources in Africa.
Thank you. There is a follow-up question to that, which concerns the outreach activities. How can we use outreach to all stakeholders, industry, policy, agencies, and the public, to intervene early on how to prevent, handle, and deal with emergent pollutants? Perhaps if any of you would like to take that question. I know that UNESCO is undertaking a lot of outreach. Perhaps Abou Amani or Sarantuyaa, would you like to answer that question about outreach to stakeholders?
Yeah, maybe if I can add before giving the floor to Sarantuyaa on the specificity related to the issue of emergent pollutant. But in general, of course, it's part of our mandate of our work to reach out to those who need the knowledge, because what member states are looking at us in terms of science, they want science in solving societal issues. So our work is to work with the academia, the scientists, the top scientists working on generating the knowledge, but the knowledge should not stay within university, within academia among themselves. That knowledge should be brought to those who need that knowledge. This is why such kind of conferences are important, but we need to go beyond that. We need to have a platform such as science policy platform, where we can bring on board really decision makers also who need that knowledge. So yes, indeed, it's part of our current work, but specifically for the pollutant, maybe Sarantuyaa can add something. Sarantuyaa?
Thank you, Abu. So with regard to emergent pollutants, the communicating scientific knowledge, information to stakeholder groups are very important. First, policy makers, because they are the change makers through appropriate policies. And I would like to give an example how UNESCO has been able to influence policy development on emerging pollutants. So together with the Helcom Convention on the Protection of the Baltic Sea, we did an assessment on pharmaceuticals in the Baltic Sea region, both in freshwater and marine ecosystems. And based on the assessment, we produced policy recommendations, and this was communicated to ministers of the Helsinki Convention. And because we were able to communicate our scientific information to policymakers, it resulted in the development of one of the first indicators on monitoring pharmaceuticals in the Baltic Sea, and also it led to the development of new policy actions and projects. So that's really important, that if we really communicate the scientific information to target groups, it can lead to massive changes in addressing these pollutants. Second about group is the users. So the users, consumers are not only users, they are key actors in reducing the emission of these pollutants into the environment. For example, through responsible lifestyle consumption, we can reduce the emerging pollutants that end up into the freshwater environments through wastewater, solid waste. And so this can be done through little changes in our lifestyles. So this is really important, how to communicate. So usually scientists like to communicate among themselves, but it's now time to communicate beyond the scientific community. And of course, it's much more difficult to bring on board industries, but I think they are also now very much interested in becoming more responsible producers, and they have very social, high sense of social responsibility. So I think it's also time to engage them. Thank you.
Okay, there is a slightly different, there is a question from Claudia Olazabal, from someone from the audience interested in how the EU strategy deals with transboundary emerging pollutants from non-EU member states. They are asking if there is some sort of collective or partnership approaches to deal with issues of transboundary pollutants with non-EU member states, especially regarding areas of policies and monitoring. Perhaps you want to take that question?
Yes, we have a very strong policy for neighboring countries. So the ones who are not in the EU but are our neighbors, like its names conveys, where we, of course, since we are neighbors and they are not in the Union, but of course we are. There are a number of transboundary, not only in environment, but in many other areas, transboundary links. We have a very strong cooperation, trying to certainly make sure that they are aware of the problems that can be transboundary, that we also inform them that if there's something coming from our side to them, but that they inform us if there is something coming from their side to us. And there is this neighboring policy is accompanied by a lot of funds, helping them to monitor the state of the environment, helping them, if possible, to adapt their legislation so that is as close as possible to ours, and so that we will have a much more comparable policy framework. So there is a very strong, because as the person who has put the question has mentioned, there's of course a very strong and strategic interest to make sure that our neighbors are also very well aware and equipped to tackle things which of a not transboundary nature. So there are beyond research, also environmental policy cooperation, also monitoring efforts which are done jointly, etc.
I see. Well, I'm having a look at the question and answer list, and I see we cover quite a lot. Yes, there is another one for you, Claudia, and perhaps we should be wrapping up. There's someone who asked, one of the lessons learned from the EEA report in 2001 was to ensure the use of lay and local knowledge in the appraisal of emerging pollutant. And then, do you have any other example of how lay and scientific knowledge can help developing an approach? They ask maybe for pesticides.
Yes, I see that's the question from Javier.
Yeah.
That's probably one of our weakest points, because we are, I would say, fairly well equipped to do public consultations. But it's true that the local knowledge doesn't get to the public consultations we do at our level, at EU level. So it's difficult to gather at EU level this kind of layman and local knowledge. So that's one of the areas where indeed, and that was indeed one of the lessons learned, that we should indeed tap into more. And we certainly say to member states and local authorities to tap on it, but at the EU level is difficult because we are so many layers above the local level that it's sometimes difficult for them to participate in our consultations, and then we rely on European associations, which have a much broader view than the local knowledge. But that's a very good point.
I think we have time for one more question, Monica.
There is a question addressed to Gabriel, asking saying that the conference aims to bring everybody to reflect and talk about emerging pollutant. And the participant wants to ask if in the outreach activities there has been any thought to include mass media as a partner in education and information of people and communities, as well as other actors on this issue. So perhaps, Gabriel, if you'd like to take the question.
Yeah. And I know we're running out of time. The short answer is yes, but not enough. There is outreach to the mass media. There are actually many journalists who focus specifically on water issues, pollution issues, and so on, but certainly not enough. We are in contact with various organizations that are working on this. I'll highlight one of them called Circle of Blue. They have been excellent at presenting and disseminating this kind of information, but there's other groups out there, and we certainly encourage them to connect with IWRA, with UNESCO, to try to collaborate on these kinds of information sharing. But if you have suggestions on who else should be involved, that we would certainly welcome that.
Thank you. Yes, I think there are quite a few questions that we haven't been able to answer, but they will be written answers to these questions in the conference proceedings that we will provide. Renée, if you want to, if there is anything that I'm missing here, otherwise I'll give the floor to you.
Okay, thank you. I think it's time that we wrap up. It's been a fascinating opening ceremony. On behalf of UNESCO and IWRA, we thank the speakers for their contributions with their interesting research on this important issue. And we thank all the participants from around the world for your participation in this session. We are very pleased that 2,400 people from more than 100 countries have registered for this conference, which shows the importance of emerging contaminants. As a reminder, we will collect all the written responses from presenters to any remaining questions we have received and will place the answers on the conference website. We also want to remind you that you can see an excellent selection of submitted conference posters online on the website, which is www.iwraonlineconference.org. These posters can be found under the posters menu. And if you have any questions on the posters, you can send us an email to online.conference@iwra.org, and we will contact the poster authors to respond to your queries. With regard to PowerPoint presentations you have just seen, they will be made available soon on our conference website as well, along with a video recording of this session. The conference will continue at 14:45 CET, which is in 15 minutes, with a session on emerging pollutants in aquatic ecosystems. Please stay with us as we explore the identity and impact of and potential solutions to emerging pollutants in water. Thank you very much. And the opening ceremony is now officially closed.
Thank you.